Hello and welcome to First Blood, part one of our First Blood series on Diminishing Returns. We're going to be looking at the Rambo franchise over the next 2 weeks. Well, this week and next week.
It's funny, isn't it? Not just to jump straight in.
The names.
The names.
The weirdest naming convention in the history of Hollywood cinema.
Yeah, just the fact that obviously they made the first film, it was named after the book, and that was that. But then Rambo became such an iconic character that now they're the Rambo films.
Yeah. Well, yeah, First Blood is, good name for a film.
Yeah.
It's but it's unusually artistic rather than just Rambo here shoot men, which is what the franchise became. And so like you say, it went from First Blood to so it's First Blood, then Rambo : First Blood Part 2, then it's just Rambo 3, and then the fourth one is just called Rambo.
I can't bear it. It drives me crazy. It messes with my OCD. I'm trying to be quiet until you introduce me, and I can't do it. What are they doing? What are they playing at?
They could have at least called the fourth one Rambo and spelt it R4MBO.
Do you know what? It's the fault of the Fast and the Bleeding Furious. That's what it is.
It really confuses people as well. Like, honestly, I've had so many conversations with people just in the last few weeks whilst I was rewatching these films, and people going, "Oh, I don't like Rambo. I watched it," and I was like, "Did you watch the first one, First Blood?" And they were like, "Well, I watched Rambo, whatever that one is." And I was like, "Was he in Burma?" "Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, that's the fourth one." "Oh, okay. I don't think I've seen the first one then." It really confuses people.
No, seriously, in the 80s, when there were lots of sequels, it was sort of the first time really that sequels got out of hand like that. And you had Rocky I, Rocky II, Rocky III, and Rocky IV, and it was really simple. And then it's the fault of the Fast and the Furious Fourths. I don't know. I don't watch these stupid films, but it's ridiculous. Just number them.
I agree. At least the new one is Rambo: Last Blood, which does, put it very obvious where that one goes.
Well, but then in another 10 years, when he does another one, Son of Rambo, I know that's already been done, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. It's going to be Rambo: Last Blood Part 2. Rambo 6 Last Blood Part 2. Rambo 6 First Blood : Last Blood Part 2.
Okay, so before we get any further, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Alan. Over there is my regular partner, not like that, Sol. And joining us this week, once again, in his capacity of living memory, it's Gareth Allen.
Thank you.
Yeah, Gareth, of course, we always bring you on for the 80s films because that's when you were a teenager. No,
yes. Not quite, but not quite. I'm quite happy to be the voice of experience amongst your callow youth.
Alan loves having you on because
it makes me feel young.
Normally he's the old dinosaur, and I make fun of him for it.
Yeah, so we are doing a 2-week run covering the 4 Rambo films, two in each, I guess. We're just going to record and see what happens. I guess the obvious place to start. Let's start with you, Gareth, because you presumably saw these films before any of us. Did you see? You were too young for First Blood first time.
Yeah, well, I was born in 1975, so I was 7 when First Blood came out. So yeah, I was far too young to watch that. But I think in the late 80s, when I would have seen these films, I'm pretty sure I saw Rambo. I get this right. Rambo: First Blood Part 2, the second one. I'm pretty sure I saw that first, and that really fits into the pattern of those 80s one-man army, Arnold Schwarzenegger type films.
Yeah.
And I think I probably saw First Blood after that and was surprised by how different it was. And, the conventional wisdom is First Blood was a serious film and then they got a little bit silly, which I think is probably a reasonable position to take. But yes, the second one, which we're going to talk about today, is really, the stereotypical Rambo film.
Well, it was the obvious how similar this is to the Rocky franchise in the way it went. Now, Rocky 2, you could argue, was pretty similar to Rocky 1. But yeah, by the time Rocky 3 came along, and then that kind of continuation of just going into extremes, and then coming back 20 years later with something a little bit more.
First Blood to Rocky, I think it is an interesting comparison. I think it's very much it's kind of the underdog side, ugly step sibling, not as well respected, arguably not fairly so. It's kind of like the Indiana Jones to Stallone's Star Wars, the Futurama to his Simpsons.
To just speak of Stallone for a bit, obviously he did Rocky, but the rest of his career wasn't quite taking off the way he wanted to. He did Rocky 2, and then he did Rocky 3 the same year as First Blood. But the other stuff he was doing around that time...
I remember there was a film called Fist, which was about unions or something. I remember seeing that right at the time when, it would have been on video, but I'd just seen Rambo and I loved all the Rocky films. And I watched this stupid drama about blue-collar workers in the Midwest, and it was terrible.
Well, I know Fist was his follow-up to Rocky. That was literally the thing he did afterwards. But it was written by Joe Esterhaus. And in Joe Esterhaus's...
Oh, you've spoken about him.
I've probably told this story before.
You read his book?
Yeah, Joe Esterhaus has got quite a famous autobiography, which is very much slagging off Hollywood and stuff. But in that book, he talks about writing Fist, which is one of the first scripts he wrote. And Sylvester Stallone, because he'd just written Rocky and that was his big thing, he sort of insisted on doing a pass on the script, did a pass on it, made very little change, but then said, right, I have a writing credit now.
Yeah.
So Joe Esterhaus, he kind of was going to challenge it, and they said to him, look, we're going to release the novelization of this script, and you're going to get a big chunk of that money, and we're going to put a picture of Stallone on the front and say, now a major motion picture, but if you don't give him a writing credit, he's not going to let us use his picture. So they essentially bribed him, I suppose, or blackmailed him into letting Sylvester Stallone have a credit. Now, the reason I mentioned that is because Sylvester Stallone is the co-writer on all the Rambo
I am curious
films.
about this. I'm curious about if he's sitting in a writer's room saying, "Oh yeah, give him a bow and arrow," and that constitutes the writing.
I don't think that's his doing. I'll get to this later on, but I think he did do a bit of writing on these.
Okay.
I'm going to base this purely on. Yeah, certainly the second one. I don't know about the first one.
Well, let's bear in mind, right? Sylvester Stallone did write Rocky. He was Oscar nominated for it, in fact.
Exactly.
He is an Oscar nominated.
But it was
writer.
a heavily improvised film, Rocky. It's clear as day to watch it that he kind of came up with a broad structure and then they improvised most of it.
I suspect that's what we've got in the later Rambo films. Obviously, in First Blood, it's based on a novel, so it's much more to it. Yes. How much Sylvester? But I don't know if you've read anything about the story behind First Blood. I did a little bit of reading on it because I was trying to figure out where it came from. But it's based on a novel by David Morrell, which was written 10 years earlier, and it went through sort of a bit of a production hell, just going from one hand to another, and nobody kind of could nail anyone down, and eventually came to these two guys. I can't remember their name. The two guys who were the producers of this film, this was the first thing they produced, and then they got Stallone on board and blah blah blah. So this was a troubled production, and not troubled exactly, but it took a long time to make this work. They changed some significant things from the novel, and crucially, the big story that comes with it.
Rambo dies in the novel.
Yeah. Rambo dies. Not only does Rambo die, but he also kills a lot of people very directly, which he does not in the first film. And but one big thing was that they shot this entire film. It was 3 to 3.5 hours long. Stallone hated it.
Really?
Stallone hated it. He thought it was going to kill his career. I mean, they were trying to basically buy it and to bury it. And what they ended up doing was completely chop it in half. They took out almost all of Rambo in terms of all his kind of backstory and personality and stuff, and made it this really stripped down kind of bare character who barely speaks. And it works so much better. And they literally cut it down from 3 hours to an hour and a half.
Definitely. One of the things I like about the film, watching it again, is that there's no spare time in there. It cuts along really quickly, doesn't it?
Basically, cards on the table. I love First Blood, and one of the reasons I love it is the pacing is so tight. There's no chance to get bored with it, really. And another reason I love it is that Rambo himself is a real enigma. You get just enough of his backstory for it to work completely, but you never delve into it too much. I can totally see how there would have been a temptation to have all these flashback sequences to him in Nam, but that would just be boring, basically. That's not what the film is. It's not what it's about. And the brief flashes that you get, very brief flashes, I assume, probably, from the sounds of it, come from deleted scenes, perhaps, things that were shot to be a lot longer. Yeah.
I mean, and it was shot. That wasn't a script. It was shot and edited, and it was ready to go. And they were like, "No, this is awful. We need to do something about this." And I believe, as far as I know, it was Stallone who was kind of leading that charge, rather than the producers. You know, so he obviously has some sense of quality control.
Oh yeah, completely. I think he does. I think it's often misguided, but.
Okay, so the book was written in 1972. This film was made in 1982. When is the film set?
I just assumed it was set in 1982, but that's because it's like the old days before I was born.
See,
tell it apart.
That's the obvious assumption.
I assume that.
But
it's post-Vietnam. The war's over.
But in 1982, the war's been over for 7 years.
Yeah.
And this guy's still drifting around. Like, I got more the impression that he's supposed to have just been like maybe a year or so.
Just got back.
Which, if it was written in 1972, would make sense. I don't get the impression that he's been drifting for that long, and that there's still this kind of feeling of kind of, I don't know, resentment towards the troops, I guess, that he's getting. Like,
I always assumed it was just he's been drifting for years and years, because I just assumed
it looks like David Banner, doesn't he? He's walking around, looking for adventures.
I never considered an alternative, but I suppose now that you mention it, yeah, it kind of would make sense if it wasn't that long.
It just doesn't quite fit that he'd been drifting for 10 years, and nothing's happened before, and he's like, has he just been getting on with his life? Because what happens here? Okay, let's let's get into the details. John Rambo, he's a kind of ex-special services Marine type guy. He served in Vietnam. He's seen some shit. And he's just sort of not found his place back in real life yet, and he's drifting around. So he walks into this small town, and because he's got wild long hair, and
because he looks like a soldier. I think this is really interesting about this. That if you think about today's veneration of the armed forces, especially in America, that's totally at odds with this period, isn't it? Just the fact that he looks like a soldier, he looks like trouble.
I always found that quite strange in this film, because it is so completely at ends with my understanding of how the US treats its military, and so is that.
But after Vietnam, that was very much not the case, and that I think that's what makes this a real period piece.
Did they decide they loved the military as a result of how badly
Rambo.
they treated people? Well, yeah, I mean,
I think the turning point was 9/11. God, I've been on this podcast 3 times and we talked about 9/11 every single time. but that really changed things, I think. But certainly in this period after Vietnam, then the armed forces were seen as very negatively by the wider society.
Really?
I think it probably did change before 9/11. Yes.
Yeah, like if you see how Rambo is presented in this film originally, you can tell he's a drifter, and I think there was a lot of Vietnam vets who were just like, they'd killed people and had been traumatized, and then they'd just been let loose. So I think there was a lot of that going on at the time.
So was that a US thing? Because obviously we have poppies in the UK, and there's all the memorial thing with World War I and World War II, and to a lesser extent the other wars that have happened. So was it a uniquely American thing? That was it like the military was seen as heroes by the general public, and then Vietnam being the first properly televised war soured them on it, and the fact that
I think so, yeah. I think that's probably. I think that's probably a fairly simplistic read of it, and I can't be any more complex than that. But I think basically that's true. Yeah.
There was a big turn against the Vietnam War as a concept, like as a political construct.
Well, yeah,
and the military got caught up in that as the tools of the government. Yeah,
the same's true of Iraq and Afghanistan and all those wars post 9/11, and yet the military's still come out with everyone in America being thanks for your service. And
but that's it. I think, but that's what I mean. This was kind of the start of that, and I think what's come out of that is like hate the war, not the troops. You know, that's the idea,
Right.
because everyone hated the troops, and then everyone's like, "Well, it's not their fault. They're just like whichever poor kids like can't get a job, and they just put them in the military or whatever." And like in Vietnam, they were drafted, so it was like they had no choice, really.
Yeah.
Unless you unless you're rich and can afford to buy your way out of it.
Or if you had those dreadful bone spurs like Donald Trump.
Yeah, I've got flat feet. Anyway, so basically what happens was as soon as he walks into this town, he's obviously a drifter there. The Sheriff Brian Dennehy, spots him, just sees that he's going to be trouble. And I really like the Brian Dennehy character. Let me just quickly look up what the character's name was. It was something silly.
Teasel.
That's it, Sheriff Teasel. So
I don't think I've ever seen Brian Dennehy in anything else.
I think you can make a strong argument that Brian Dennehy's the star of this film. And I really liked him. I think the character's great.
My only knowledge of him outside of this is in the South Park movie when...
And tell them to unite for truth. That's what Brian Boitano do.
Someone say my name?
Who are you?
I'm Brian Dennehy.
What? No, not fucking Brian Dennehy. Then get the fuck out of here.
Oh, bye.
When Brian Boitano dropped through time...
Well, he's one of those people who really gets around and does a lot of stuff. I really like the way he's introduced here, the character, because, you know, he's like the happy sheriff. Hi, everybody. He knows everybody's name.
He's not completely a total dick off the bat. He kind of makes an effort to put a nice face on it. He absolutely isn't.
Yeah, well, and he sees this guy.
He is a bit
he's like
of a dick. He is a bit bigoted, and you know, but he kind of puts a nice face on it. He's polite. It's believable that he would.
But that's it. It's like he's the nice face. Obviously, he's the sheriff. He probably gets elected, so obviously he's friendly to everyone. He knows everybody's name and all that. But then, you also kind of you do understand. He's like going, "Oh, look at this guy. He's going to be trouble. I'm just going to sort of like usher him gently out of town," you know. But it's like if you made this film 20 years earlier and Rambo was black, or it might not even be about a military thing, but like. I feel like that would have the same feel to it. It's like, you know...
I wondered about this. It did have that feel of a racist southern sheriff's department, didn't it? Even though it's not in the South and he's not black. But it was that same sort of dynamic, that same feel.
It was just, I've taken one look at you and it's just like, look, I've got no problem with you, but I just know this is going to cause trouble. I don't want to get involved. So get out. Yeah.
But I like the way I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I like the way that his character and the way Dennehy played it. You know, he sort of descends into this. It becomes more and more bigoted and angry, and
you can understand because of the things that happen.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
You know, it's like the motivation is there.
He's in over his head, and there's nothing he can do about it.
Yeah. And you know, similarly though, I love Rambo and how Stallone plays off him in those early scenes. I love how, you know, he's kind of belligerent in the face of this.
Yeah, he's being difficult. He's not doing anything wrong, but he's just being difficult.
Yeah, but that's it. But it's completely kind of, you are sort of thinking like, yeah, go on, Rambo. You walk back into that town. You show him. you exert your rights.
I also really liked, and I guess this comes down from they chopped this film in half. This is a very dynamic film. We get right into the point. We don't have no backstory for Rambo. Yeah, we get this setup where he gets thrown out of town, and then boom, he breaks out of prison. He's the car chase. It's like, whoa, this is right. We're in. We're done.
Yeah,
we're ready.
I love it. If I made the note without knowing any of that. One of my first notes here is just the pacing in this film is, and then all caps, fantastic. A tight 93 minutes.
Just to come back to the Vietnam thing, is I couldn't particularly put my finger on any other films that deal with PTSD, particularly from Vietnam, was First Blood like a game changer in terms of...
Well, what about The Deer Hunter? The Deer Hunter's not, it's a very different film to this, but the characters in that are clearly mentally damaged.
Hey, The Deer Hunter, another 3+ hour movie that would have massively, massively benefited from being chopped down to 93 minutes.
Oh, fucking hell, The Deer Hunter, yeah.
That's very true, and I think perhaps First Blood is the film that The Deer Hunter might have been.
Yeah,
and there's something for everyone to think about.
Because The Deer Hunter, genuinely, I mean, we're probably never going to cover it, so I'll get into it here. The Deer Hunter is one of those films where there are amazing scenes in it. There are pieces in that film that are outstanding, but it's just interminable when you try and watch the whole 3 hours.
That wedding scene, the opening wedding scene is 40 minutes long. It's just like, right, look, we need to establish these guys are friends. We can do that in 10 minutes. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in this film, it takes us 3 minutes before Rambo's in the police station. Yeah. That's more like it.
Exactly. It's brilliant.
Yeah, just in terms of filmmaking, that's a lot more dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and you do get his backstory. You do know more than enough about Rambo and where he's come from.
Absolutely.
But it's all come from his superior guy who comes in later on, and the little glimpses of flashbacks, and that one scene at the very start where he's looking for his army buddy who's dead, and you get it.
I'm jumping ahead here, but what I would really have liked at the end of this film, what would have been the best ending for me, is if Rambo had killed himself. And I just think it would have been a really kind of rounded ending to the character, like the ultimate kind of loss of this guy.
And keep it light, mate.
Well, do you know how he dies in the book? I mean, I don't. I haven't looked into it. I just know he dies.
Him and Sheriff Teasel kind of sort of go mano a mano, and they both shoot each other kind of at the same time. But Rambo does that he goes out there knowing full well that Teasel's going to shoot him. So he's kind of, again, he knows he's going to get killed, but he's going to get him as well. But then he kills Teasel, but he's just been wounded, and he's worried he's not going to die. And then Colonel Troutman shoots him in the head.
Brilliant.
And kills him to give him his kind of victorious death in battle. But also,
I mean, we need to talk about Troutman, but I think Troutman is an appalling character, an appalling human being.
In the book, Colonel Troutman is not his mate who's come to try and save him. He's the person they bring in because they need someone
to neutralize him
who can deal with this kind of person.
Yeah.
Right. So he's the person heading up the search, and he doesn't know Rambo personally, but he did train him. So he's like, right, we need someone who knows what this guy's capable of. So it's not the same personal connection. So in the film, Colonel Troutman is kind of Rambo's superior, but from the war, and they've got some sort of war buddy connection, and they kind of bring him in as the person that Rambo would trust.
Yeah.
Well, certainly I can see that Rambo would trust him because he's been conditioned to do that. But if whatever problems Rambo has, whatever post-traumatic stress he has, Troutman's the cause of that. Troutman's created it. He's not his friend. Throughout this whole series, Troutman is the source of all his problems. Every time Troutman turns up, he's in trouble. He knows that there's another mission, and there's no escape. You're never going to get away from me. We will come back to this as we discuss these films. Troutman is the root cause of all his pain.
Yeah, but in the first film, Troutman was just doing his job. He was training troops to send them to war. And then he gets called in because one of his men has gone rogue in the woods.
Yeah.
So in this film, he's there for good, right?
Yes, but my point is that Rambo's furious, and we get the monologue at the end we'll talk about, where, all of his buddies are dead, and he killed all these people, and the army trained him to kill, and now what is he supposed to do? Well, all the army is Troutman. Troutman did all of that to him. Mm. All of the problems that he's got that have created this situation that have led to him being sat in this bleeding cave, that's all Troutman's doing.
He was just following orders. Richard Crenna plays Troutman. It's the kind of the thing he's most well known for now.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else either.
Yeah, what else has he been in? Because I only know him as Troutman.
Yeah,
and whilst I just got all heavy about Troutman, let's face it, he is quite a funny character.
Oh, apparently he's in Hot Shots Part 2.
Yeah, playing the Troutman character rip-off character. Yeah.
It's the same thing. All right.
Hot Shots Part 2, right? That is a perfect example of how the sequels completely overshadowed this film. That was, I think, billed very much as a Rambo spoof, and it's a parody of Rambo First Blood Part 2 with bits of Rambo 3 in it. I don't think there's any First Blood in the entire film.
You know, Richard Crenna was brought onto this last minute, like literally a couple of days before filming started, which is why it's Richard Crenna. But apparently it was Kirk Douglas who dropped out because he didn't like, they were changing the ending and having Rambo live and all that, and he wanted the book's ending, and so how different it could have been. So
Can we talk about the supporting cast of Keystone Cops that Sheriff Brian Dennehy has?
yeah,
Because I quite enjoyed them. I like young David Caruso.
yeah.
Who's the one that just makes me think of Ron Howard, even though it isn't Ron Howard?
That's young David Caruso.
I think that's David Caruso. Yeah.
Yeah, I like him. He has a real Richie Cunningham vibe about him. It's not just the ginger. It's just everything about it.
Yeah, but that's one thing that I was missing from the film, and I suspect is something to do with all the cuts they made, that they were setting up the David Caruso character as a kind of, he's the sympathetic one.
Yeah.
He's the one who feels bad. He's the young, like, he's still not jaded enough to.
But he also knows. He also there's a whilst the other police are very complacent with this guy, Caruso takes one look at him and he's like, this guy's dangerous. It's not just we should be nice to him. It's just like, Jesus, this guy is,
he gets injured along with everyone else, though. I like that he kind of still gets caught in the crossfire. Just because he's the nice guy, he doesn't, get away with it. But you're right, it does feel very much like a loose end. Like, that character's supposed to have a moment with him at the end where he stops Brian Dennehy from shooting a shot at him and, stops him being killed or something. It does feel like there's meant to be a little moment there
But it does create some conflict within the group of police, within the hunters, which adds to their sense of disorganization and unable to match Rambo.
It stops the police force just being completely two-dimensional cartoon villain as well.
Yeah, I think that's why I like it. It gives some depth to the group.
Yeah, because there is one kind of the real arsehole cop who is
the deputy. Yeah.
Goltz, is it? I think he's the one who falls out the helicopter, basically.
Yeah, the one death in the film.
Well, he's the one who, if this was in the 50s in Mississippi, he's the one who'd actually be the head of the KKK in the evenings.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, basically, what happens? Rambo gets picked up by the police. They push him too hard. They're really there's a bit of police brutality in the station, basically, as they strip and hose him down and go to shave him. They push him too far. He snaps, bit of PTSD, has a flashback to Vietnam, being tortured, and runs out the station, beating up policemen on the way, steals a motorbike. So now he's legitimately a wanted man. And the film just becomes a straightforward cat and mouse chase movie for the remaining hour and a bit. And I've realized...
But Saul, is the cat hunting the mouse or is the mouse hunting the cats?
I fucking love cat and mouse movies. I fucking love this kind of manhunt film dynamic. I've realized it. I love it in No Country for Old Men. I love when you just get it down to this kind of simplicity of a plot, and it's great. So most of the film is just Rambo hiding in the woods, Die Hard in a forest,
send people out. Did you notice, by the way, in the car chase, when the sheriff's chasing him after on the motorbike and they kind of go into the woods and stuff, when he crashes the police car and it just sort of turns over on its roof? Do you remember that bit? And how it's kind of not particularly stunty. It just looks like they drove a thing off. It was an accident. It was just they didn't mean to do it, but then they were like, well, we've done it now. Get Brian in the car and get him to crawl out of it. Which I like, because it does look kind of it suits the film that it's kind of an underwhelming car crash.
It feels really shambolic and just it just feels like the police fucking up, which is great.
I like that.
I love so much of how this is done, though. The bit where he grabs that motorbike outside the police station. It's just filmed so viscerally, and
pulls the guy
you
off.
can tell that that's actually just Stallone grabbing a guy off a motorbike for real. It's just, I don't know. It's just, I mean, later on, Stallone is on the side of a cliff, isn't he? And he jumps down, and it's a guy jumping off a cliffside. I think it was actually Stallone, from what I remember. So there is
years before Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible.
There's a real raw energy to the film, because so much of it does just feel like they're doing it in camera, doing it for real.
I did to say we could probably sum up the sort of the middle, hour of the film as, Rambo hides in the woods while people come and try and get him. It is very engaging, and new things keep happening. It does push forward. And one of the crucial changes they make from the book is that in the book, Rambo is just killing anybody he gets his hands on, like innocent civilians, police who are chasing him, military. He doesn't care. He's just fucking killing. And and I think this was Stallone basically wanted to make him more sympathetic or more kind of like you still want the audience to be with him by the end of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it's a very, very different film to what it would be if he was just killing all these men. He kills one person in this film, and it's a mistake. It's an accident. It's him acting in self-defense.
Not even really his fault.
Yeah,
it's really not really him who does it. Really,
he throws a rock at a helicopter as a guy's about to shoot him to disrupt him, and the guy falls out of the helicopter and dies, and he's
the guy is literally trying to murder him with a gun at the time, so even if he did do it deliberately,
it's both an accident and self-defense in tandem. And I totally can see how this was conceived of as, he's an unstoppable killing machine, and they've it's Frankenstein, isn't it? We've created this monster, and now he's unleashed upon us because we haven't treated him properly. And
but it's just you can't have a protagonist who's sympathetic, who just kills people. Well, unless they're Vietnamese, which we'll see in the sequel.
The way in the book, like, he just goes out. He's absolutely mental, and he's killing everyone, and he has to be killed. He has to be. But it's kind of a comment on. It's not really a personal story. It's more about, look, this is what your army is producing, these sort of people, and the post-traumatic stress, and this is the only way to stop them, kind of thing. That's how mad it is. But to make him more sympathetic, if you want to have him live at the end, I think that's crucial. Which is why I would have liked a suicide ending. I think that would have been the kind of the neat wrap-up where we do feel sorry for him, and then it's this very tragic ending. Because the ending as it stands, if we just jump right to the very end, is he basically gives himself in. And we don't know what happens to him at that point, or we don't know what's going to happen to him. And it just feels a little bit kind of flat or anticlimactic somehow. There was a moment where he cuts his arm, like as he falls off a tree or something, whatever. But he's stitching up his arm. He's stitching it up himself,
Great
and
scene.
it's like it's all bleeding. It's like, this is great effects for it. That looks like a real arm. It was just I just really impressed by that very simple kind of practical effects.
I've always been really impressed with that shot.
Because I genuinely can't see how they're doing it.
It's the best self-surgery scene I can think of, where someone has to perform a little operation on themselves, and that's.
What about in Predator, when he like cauterizes it with acid or whatever he does? The alien.
I think you're forgetting Terminator with the mechanical.
I'm not
wrist
forgetting
operation.
Terminator. I like this one more.
What about Total Recall, where he pulls that thing out of his nose?
Actually, while we're talking about the stitching up of the arm, let's talk about knives now. Because he has that sort of suture kit, and he has a compass, and he has everything in this lovely knife that he carries around with him.
Yeah.
And there is nothing in the current discourse that makes me feel more old than knife crime. Like, we talk about knife crime. When I was a kid, everybody had a knife. It was fine. Everybody had a penknife. There was one kid at my school who had a Rambo knife. He had a knife that looked exactly like Rambo's. Same size, blade, blood channels, all of that business. Like, blood channels. Like, what do you need that for? As if you're going to go out hunting rabbits. And that was all right. He was 9. That was just what we did in the 80s.
I was just about to say, I remember an incident at high school. I remember back in my high school when a friend of mine who was being bullied by this kid brought a knife in to shit him up. and then panicked and threw it in a dustbin first thing in the morning because he sort of realised the extent to which he'd brought a knife into school. That was serious. And we had a look in the bin, and it was a bread knife.
Well, you can do some damage with a bread knife.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a crap penknife, but that was more because my mum wouldn't buy me anything.
I mean, I had a a proper Swiss Army knife penknife. That was for going out and doing the
whittling
cub camp and stuff. That was for...
I had a penknife, like a big fucking blade on it, and it was I bought it on a Cub Scout, probably Scouts, not Cubs. Yeah, on a Scout camp. And that was like, oh yeah, you can buy that. You can use that for scouting. And it's like, that was perfectly fine. But it was a big old, 4-inch blade on it.
And to be honest, I was more interested in, look, it's got a magnifying glass.
So, what else aren't you allowed to do anymore, eh?
Conkers.
You're not allowd to do conkers anymore in case it goes in your eye.
Can't do anything these days.
Well, Gareth, you have a child. You have a 13-year-old son. So I guess you have a more direct comparison. Like we're not in touch with the kids.
Well, I'm not in touch with the kids. He hasn't spoken to me for 2 years.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
No, but they're not walking around with knives. I do know that much. That seems to have become a relatively taboo in recent years.
Yeah.
And, it's not the end of the world. I'm not bemoaning that, back in the old days we could go out whittling. I think it's all right. I think I'm fine without them carrying knives around.
Don't worry, because I think it's a European law that you're not allowed knives, so we'll be all right soon. So anyway, let's jump back into the film. Shall we jump to the end let's jump to where he and Troutman finally kind of get together. We get Rocky's only dialogue of the film, basically. The only time he says more than 4 words. Pretty famous monologue that he does, yeah.
Sol, do you want to have a go at it? Just remind us.
That I have $1 million helicopter. I looked at Jimmy. Jimmy had no legs. Jimmy legs, come on. He have no legs.
So I'm just looking at my notes here. While he was making that monologue, I've written 3 things. Number 1, Stallone is using his acting. Number 2, this is a perfect example of post-traumatic stress. Number 3, Troutman has fucking nothing to offer this guy.
Yes, yes.
I mean, talking about Stallone, right? I think he is underrated as an artist. And I think the Rambo sequels have done a lot of that to him.
Yeah.
But I think he is a legitimately good actor, and I think that's on show throughout this film. He can tap into it when he wants to, and I think he does have some very good creative instincts that, again, are on show in this film.
I think he does a great job with this monologue, actually. We're sort of joking about it, but it is a really good dramatisation of PTSD.
Exactly. And it's the one point in the film where he kind of does have to do some heavy lifting in terms of acting. But, throughout the film, there's a lot of sequences where he's just carrying it. He's carrying the screen. It's just him. It's a one-man show for much of the film. And, he does it. And he's got very expressive eyes. He does a lot without saying very much. I think he brings a hell of a lot to this film. Not to mention the Tom Cruise-esque willingness to suffer for his art. Apparently he broke a rib filming that stunt that I mentioned earlier, where he jumped off the cliffside and landed in all the trees and everything. So he's.
I read that in the catering, he would only eat things that would make a billy goat puke. That was one of my favourite lines. We used to say that in the school playground.
Things are different back then. Do you remember when videos came out, Gareth?
Yeah, I do.
Well, because I have one more note about the first film, if we're still on it, which is just the soundtrack. The music is incredible to First Blood. I think it has one of the finest film scores ever written. The main theme, it's not a particularly famous film theme, but I don't know why. I think it's some really wonderful, beautiful music. I'd take it over the Rocky soundtrack, certainly.
What about the end song over the credits?
I was going to say the one thing that undermines it. The one thing that completely undermines it is when someone starts singing over the top of the main theme at the very end, and that is
really
just
jarring.
embarrassing.
It's a long road when you're on your own, and it hurts when they tear your dreams apart. And every new
It is awful, isn't it?
It's a long road. Yeah, it's awful. The lyrics as well. Fuck me. When you're on your own, it's yeah. But the actual film score is incredible.
Should we rate that one?
Yeah.
I did enjoy First Blood. I think it's got a lot to offer. It reminded me of Rocky and that kind of like the cultural idea of what Rambo is. You actually go back to the beginning and go, oh, this is actually very good. But yeah, I give it a good solid 7.
Okay. Well, I think I'm giving it an 8, but I think it's a high 8. I think it's a great film. I think the acting's really good. I think Brian Dennehy's really good in it. But most of all, the pacing, it just flew along. It was, it was a really entertaining 90 minutes. I was on at the edge of my seat.
I think it's a real shame that the sequels to this film exist, because they really have tainted people's opinions of it.
That's very true.
I've spoken before about the early days of IMDb, back when I joined, God knows how long ago now, probably like the early 2000s. And I remember first discovering First Blood, Rambo, probably being more aware of it from the cultural significance the sequels had. I remember looking up First Blood on IMDb, and it had about 6 out of 10 at the time. And it's one of these films that really has been reevaluated, I think, as more people have come to it. And because I think people just remembered it as, oh yeah, stupid Rambo blowing stuff up. It now has 7.7 on IMDb, so it's a significant jump up over the last few years. And I've been part of that. I love this film. It was a very formative film for me as well, I think. It was one of the first films I discovered when I was really getting into cinema, that I really clicked with and connected with as a teenager. So it's kind of weird, really, to think that I think most people have this as like a childhood, like Gareth was saying, watching them on VHS and so on. But for me, it was very much, I'm getting into cinema. What are the culturally significant classic films out there? Mm-hmm. So anyway, for me, it is and I will admit this is a very generous score, but for me, it is a 9 out of 10.
Well, very good. Didn't expect that. Fair enough.
I love it.
So based on the success of that, they decided to make a sequel, and this time we didn't have to worry about any pesky novels giving us plot points. Just good old Sylvester Stallone's ideas, and apparently
James Cameron.
Well, it's credited as a story by Kevin Jarrah, so obviously someone else. That must have been a previous script. And they obviously changed enough that he just got a story credit. But yeah, James Cameron is a credited screenplay writer on this.
You can see some of his DNA in here. Going back to what you were saying before, you were hinting at the idea that Stallone doesn't really do any writing on these films that he's credited for. I think this film proves that he does, because James Cameron, I think, has really distanced himself from this film. He said it was really changed from his script that he turned in. And I can believe it, because it's not a particularly good script. And James Cameron's a very solid, dependable writer, I think. He makes very good blockbuster films. And I think Stallone made a lot of changes to his script, and
no one was there to stop him. I had a little look at James Cameron's writing CV, and this is pretty much the only thing I can find that he wasn't otherwise involved in, either as like a director or a producer. Do you know what I mean? Like he was just a hired gun writer, and obviously this is before. Yeah, he was. Well, actually, this is the year after Terminator, but presumably it was written. Bear in mind that in terms of Stallone's career here in the 80s, we'd already got past Rocky 3, and so in terms of what Stallone was doing, we had well and truly jumped that shark. So perhaps not surprising that we go straight into Rambo craziness. I mean, look at the poster on IMDb here. It's a shirtless Stallone, like glistening, rippling muscles, holding a fucking rocket launcher.
That's what you think of when you think of Rambo. I think that is a cultural concept of what Rambo is. And
First Blood is completely buried by Rambo.
Yeah. And I think that's very strange, because this film, I would say, is more culturally significant than First Blood. It's not as good.
Certainly.
Should we play a little game here?
Okay.
Yes, please.
Higher or lower with the body count. So, First Blood, one person dies. It's an accident. Right, higher or lower, guys? First Blood Part 2.
Higher.
Higher
than what?
Do you want to take a guess as to how many people die in this film?
How we define this?
Rambo's
Is it actual that we see on screen?
People killed by Rambo's hand.
Do you mean literally by his hand, or he shoots them? Or...
No, he's responsible for killing them.
30 or 40?
Oh no, this second one. I will go with 17.
Gareth is closest. The correct number is apparently 75.
Whoa! But it's okay because they're not Americans. It's fine.
75 people, and that's not counting people killed by the villains and so on.
See, I've watched all these films the last week, and not to get too far ahead, but I knew he kills a lot of people in some of these films, but I thought I couldn't remember which ones are which. Although I can't have got that bad that quickly, surely.
So 75 is how many people die in this film. So that off the bat, that tells you this is a very, very, very different film to First Blood.
Yes.
So right up front, we have. I was just talking about how wonderful and beautiful the music is in the first film. Up front here, we have a hilariously shitty sort of quote-unquote oriental version of the theme music. Bling, ding, ding, ding. It's embarrassing. I expect better from Jerry Goldsmith, I think, who was still doing the music here. I get what he was going for, but it is not good.
Yeah, so we start off with Rambo is in prison for all that killing.
Rock breaking, like you assume civilized countries wouldn't do anymore. He's breaking rocks.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, it's the American prison system. It's very different. It's all run for profit.
Somebody's got to break those rocks.
Cheaper to get prisoners to break rocks than to do it with a machine.
Someone's got to break those rocks, man.
yeah. We need broken rocks. They're in short supply. We need loads of broken rocks.
Do you like having your driveway gravelled?
Exactly. You need him at the bottom of your fish tank.
Okay, so yeah, he's in prison and Troutman turns up. And what does that mean, Gareth, when Troutman turns up?
It means Rambo's in trouble. Troutman says to him, "You can't possibly want to stay here for another 5 years." Well, ask me again in 2 hours, because what's about to happen is far worse. Oh, but we need you. America needs you. Right, so on you come. He's just a beast of burden. Troutman's using him. I hate it. Oh, I hate him.
But he's giving him a chance to get out of prison, you know. Plus, this is a simple reconnaissance mission, you know.
Yeah, save his fellow men, his fellow army men.
He doesn't have to go in there killing people. He just needs to go and take some photos. and show that there's no prisoners of war left.
Yeah, just nip back to Vietnam, the source of all your mental anguish. It'll be fine.
But this is another thing I mentioned in the first film about the dates. Were there prisoners of war in Vietnam in 1985?
Well, this was I'm not sure what the timescale, but this was a thing in American politics during, well, it was the 80s, but I couldn't tell you exactly when, where there was it became quite a debate. Were there any American soldiers left out there? And they were negotiating with the Vietnamese government to try and find these people.
Yeah. And I think this film makes a point of, this being an extreme case. They're kind of like, can you believe there are still these people out there still? That's insane.
I don't know, does it?
Well, maybe I'm confusing it. I rewatched this film. It kind of washed over me. I don't remember it in much detail. I just got back from holiday 2 days ago, and holiday is basically the only time I ever do any reading. So I still haven't read The Diary of Anne Frank or Tolstoy or anything, but I have now read the novelization of Rambo First Blood Part 2, written by David Morrell, best-selling author of First Blood. And it was illuminating, I have to say, because I feel like I have a real insight into David Morrell as a person. He is fucking obsessed with weapons. I think he's autistic.
Yes.
I think his specialist subject is weapons.
Yeah.
Honest to God, it is insane. Right, can I read you some of this? Author's note at the start of the book.
Yeah.
Okay, so he says, in my novel First Blood, Rambo died. In the films he lives, blah, 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 blah. Thanks to so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. All this sort of stuff. Then about halfway down the page, the knife was created by Jimmy Lyle, the Arkansas knifesmith, blah, 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 blah. Goes on about the knife, the now famous knife. Goes down a bit. The bow was created, blah, 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 blah. He says, the weapons described in this book and used in the film Rambo exist. They are functional. More, they are works of art. And then it's just going on and on about all the weapons and where they've come from, who provided them.
Well, Saul, can I?
Yeah.
Can I? I've believe it or not, I have also read the novelization of Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Well, I assume for you.
What a waste of life.
I assume, so for me it was like a funny hipster ironic thing to do, laughing about the olden days. I assume for you it was because like you didn't have a video player because it was the 80s and VHS didn't exist yet.
I read it when I was at school, and because I couldn't see the film, so the book was the next best thing.
Yeah.
And I've got this memory of being in English class at school where we were supposed to be reading some work of literature. And the English teacher catching me reading the novelization of Rambo First Blood Part 2 and giving me a public dressing down that was so embarrassing that I remember literally nothing else about her class. And I was in her class for 2 years. That's all I remember about her teaching me. So, but why this chimed with me is I hadn't seen this film for years, and I watched it this week, and I was really amazed at how little detail there was about the weapons. I'd got in my memory that we'd spent ages looking at this bow and arrow and this knife, and it's obviously from the book. It was obviously from the... Now you've just said all of that. That's why I had that level of detail in my memory.
It is insane. I'm like, honest to God. So there is literally basically an entire chapter dedicated to the history of the bow and arrow. And
this is my memory of it. And in the film, it's not even mentioned. He just starts shooting bows and arrows. I was like, well, hang on a minute. We need a bit of backstory for the bow and arrow.
Yeah, it goes... It's the chapter starts, the arrows, the bow. Then it talks about Rambo's half Navajo... Am I saying that right? Ancestry?
Navajo.
Navajo.
There you go. Because he learned to be an expert archer, blah, 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 blah. And it goes on and on about the history of archery and how it's a beautiful weapon and blah, 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 blah. And then it starts to go on about the specific bow that Rambo uses and how it uses little eccentric wheels on the ends that string the string on and how that allows for a distribution of tension, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and then on page 98... he's done a little drawing of the bow. There's an actual illustration of the fucking weapon that Rambo uses.
Compound
just so
bow.
you know what he's talking about. There's no other pictures in this entire book. And it is, honest to God, it's bizarre. And it's throughout the entire book. I left the bookmark in one chapter just so at the very end, towards the climax, it's going on about Rambo killing these people. And it's him in the helicopter. And then it starts going on about the bows and arrows again. His arrows had another feature. Besides their all-black colour, their plastic vanes, their strong yet lightweight aluminium shafts, and their wide four-bladed serrated copper head ripper tips, they were hollow.
Wait a minute. Veins, shafts, tips?
Oh, mate, there is some weird... So, when you were watching this film, did you start wondering about Rambo's sex life?
No.
Well, admittedly, I did. I did start wondering, like... he seems like a weirdly asexual being. I wonder if he ever, like, wanks off to avoid this. The book goes into it. Oh. Apparently, he's incapable of, closeness, intimacy, because there's a whole thing with Co being set up as a kind of romantic interest in the book. The book tells you occasionally Rambo has wet dreams. Very occasionally he masturbates. Now, I kind of thought, well, fair enough, it's just addressing this. But then later on, there's the electrocution sequence, and it makes sure to tell you that the Russian Soviet guy who gets electrocuted by Rambo, it makes sure to tell you that as he's being electrocuted, he gets an erection and then he ejaculates, which seemed like an unnecessary detail to include. So this author,
I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I remember that from the book. Really striking detail. I'd forgotten it again until you just brought it up. I'm like, oh yeah, I recall that. Yeah.
it honestly, it is just fascinating. It is this whole bit. It's just pages of. He set an arrow onto the bow, drew the string back to its full 30-inch extension, and felt the wheels at the end of each bow limb roll over to adjust the pressure, reducing his effort from 100 pounds to 50 as he aimed at one of the trucks on the road beyond the field.
I'm hard.
It's so weird. It is so fucking weird. So I kind of want to read First Blood, because I reckon it's just going to be long lists of all the weapons Rambo's using and like detailed descriptions of him like ejaculating while he kills people. I think it's remarkable that they got First Blood out of a book by this guy. He seems absolutely insane. But I must say, I preferred. You know, they say the book's always better than the film.
Yes.
I preferred the book here, and I'll tell you why. It's almost entirely because it walks you through each step of Rambo's plan. So, in the film, it's just like Rambo jumps out, guns blazing, shooting things up. But in this, it's like a detailed, he waited for so-and-so to come here. It like explains every little thing as like a trap, like an elaborate bit of tactics being deployed. And it just makes it play very differently when you kind of have it not happening in real time, when it's when you hear inside his head. There's the bit with the helicopters, and is that still in the film? I can't even remember, where he shoots a flare at the side of the forest, the jungle, to make it look like the helicopter's crashed. I don't think that was in the film, was it?
No, I don't think so.
So, for example, there's a bit where he takes control of the helicopter, and then he's up against another helicopter that's much more of a war machine, will destroy his helicopter. So he shoots the flare against the side of the jungle, so it looks as though he's crashed. Then waits a few seconds for the other helicopter to like come over and investigate, and then like lifts up and shoots whilst the pilot's distracted. It's just things like that are far more in line with First Blood, and like, oh, he's laying a trap, he's lying in waiting. Whereas to watch Rambo First Blood Part 2, it is just machine gun, kill everyone, blood. So yeah. I have loads of these novelizations. I might start reading them more for this podcast. I've got loads of them. I've got Back to the Future Part 2. I've got the novelization of Blade Runner, which is somehow different to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Change a lot of stuff.
I've got a little
Do they
collection
still
going.
do novelizations, or is that a thing of the past?
They do, but I think it's far less of a. My understanding is these were like big business in the 80s. Because...
I bet the Star Wars films have got novelizations.
Hey, Rambo in the novelization of First Blood Part 2, he has a chat with all the prisoners of war in the helicopter when he's flying them to safety, and he's like, "You guys, you gotta see this movie Star Wars. You're gonna want to see it 6 times." It's
relatability.
Yeah. So they address the passage of time that you were on about, Alan. They make a big thing out of how long they've been gone. So I think when I was saying the film addresses that it's an unusual amount of time they've been gone, I think I'm remembering the book, not the film.
Interestingly enough, I'll just bring this up now. We haven't mentioned the director of the first film or the second film, and that's because they're basically not very well known. They haven't done a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
The third film is again another one, and then the fourth one was Stallone came
himself.
in. Yeah,
I was just going to say, is this because Stallone runs the show himself?
I guess so. Although the guy who directed Rambo First Blood Part 2 also directed Cobra after. So
Well, same principle.
yeah,
I think Cobra. By the time Cobra came around, Stallone was probably, he had the muscle to run the show himself, didn't he?
Well, Cobra was the year after First Blood Part 2.
But Cobra was Stallone at his height. That was him being Sylvester Stallone. That was Rambo as a policeman. It was the same character, really.
Yeah.
There is a woman in this film, which there was not in the first one.
James Cameron, almost certainly James Cameron's doing this character.
Yeah.
No, but if you look at we said earlier, this film's a prime example of those one-man army films. There's usually a female character in those films, and they're always actresses who've never gone on to do anything else. You look at all those Arnold Schwarzenegger films, there's always a maiden that he has to save. Yeah. And until Total Recall, when it's Sharon Stone, nothing ever came of any of those careers.
So, so we haven't really actually figured out what the plot of this is. Yeah, so he gets sent in to some Vietnam area to find out if they've still got prisoners of war. But the people sending him...
It's the camp he was in Vietnam when he himself was a prisoner of war.
Was it?
That's why Rambo's the person to go in, because he knows the lay of the land. He escaped from it before.
So that the people sending him are immediately a little bit suspect. We've got that bloke who always plays dodgy authority figures. What's his name?
Charles Napier. He actually looks like Brian Dennehy, which is quite a nice touch.
Yeah.
And then you've got the baddie off of Karate Kid, which is nice.
Yes. Some dodgy looking 80s characters. And we immediately sense there's something a bit dodgy with him. Rambo sees through them. He knows there's something else going on here, which is basically what it transpires is they don't want to find people. They just want to go through the process so they can go, yeah, there's nobody there. We don't have to spend lots of money on this. And yeah. I did end up thinking, he's got a point. When this guy sort of tries to explain his position, he's saying, like, why should we spend like millions of dollars ransom money to save these people? And it's like, yeah, if they'd been shot and died, no one would have given a second thought. Because they're prisoners of war, they become a problem. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing. It doesn't get explored very much, but,
There's this opening scene where they're in the flashing high-tech computer room with all the lights and the little plooping noises behind them.
Well, I did also notice in that scene where, because we see this in Rocky as well, Rocky 4, I think it is, but why does Sylvester Stallone hate 80s computers so much and technology? Because
and when paired with the Russians, Alan, they become a problem.
But that's exactly the same message, isn't it? Oh, you modern types with your computers, I've just got a knife and a compass.
A bow and arrow.
Progress, isn't it? Progress.
Bow and arrow
Sylvester
versus
Stallone does
machine
not
gun.
like progress. He is inherently conservative.
I think it's a specific Stallone thing. Because at the end of this film, he shoots all the computers.
Yeah, they've got it coming.
Shows them who's boss, doesn't he?
Yeah. But what's wrong with computers? That's providing more information. What's wrong with that?
So, yeah, he doesn't like technology.
I don't know how you could do a sequel to First Blood that retains the DNA of what that film is.
Well, you can't, and you shouldn't. They shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
have.
Exactly. And I kind of get this is the next logical thing to do with that character if you have to do something with him. But just how they approach it. Like I say, the book approaches it in a kind of much more of a cat and mouse way with him laying traps and so on. And I just find it very curious that the filmmakers clearly had such a lack of understanding about what made the first film work. Because my guess is James Cameron's version of the script, probably scripts before that, approached it from that same kind of way. Well, look, we're getting lots of this cat and mouse kind of stuff in here. It's just a new location. It's just not shot like that. It's shot like these Arnie movies from the 80s. It's just like gung-ho action nonsense, and it's a real shame. But yeah, like you say, I don't think you could make a good sequel to First Blood. Basically.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I was saying. I think it should have an end, a real closed ending where he dies. And but I mean, why would you make Rambo First Blood Part 2? For money, I suppose.
Why wouldn't you just call it Second Blood?
Because that's not a thing.
Or Rambo Second Blood.
Because Second Blood is not a thing, that's why.
So? Neither is 102 Dalmatians.
He makes a fair point.
So Rambo goes into the jungle. He meets up with a Vietnamese woman, and then they're supposed to just go and do a bit of reconnaissance, but obviously he finds some people and he has to rescue them. So then when he comes to try and get them off, the guys who are supposed to be helping him abandon him. That's when he knows for sure it's all been a big setup. It's all a bit very dodgy. Troutman's not happy about it, but doesn't really do anything. So then it becomes about he has to just kill everybody, right? Because he gets taken prisoner.
Yes.
And
yes,
the Vietnamese take him prisoner, but they're just the lackeys of the Russians.
Now we see the real power behind the throne.
And of course, it's an 80s film, so the Russian is played by Steven Berkoff.
Of course.
We've already seen him do this.
Who we covered in Beverly Hills Cop.
We've covered him in Beverly Hills Cop. He was also in Octopussy, where we did that, playing a Russian. So we've had him a few times as a Russian on the show.
Well, I don't want to repeat what I said when we talked about Beverly Hills Cop, but, Steve Berkoff is a classically trained actor, great theatrical actor, but every time I see him in a film, he's rubbish. His range appears to be staring. That's how he uses his acting, intimidatingly staring, and he does that very well. But that seems to be it.
Yeah.
Maybe his Lear is excellent. I wouldn't know. And that sets it up, doesn't it? So from that point, that's when he starts to escape, because obviously the big henchman goes to hit him and Rambo fights back and the escape begins here.
Yeah.
That's when the action starts.
And then he gets back, really, and then they have this crap scene where the Vietnamese woman says she wants to be with him so that she can get out of Vietnam. He seems to believe it, and then she gets immediately killed. Very weak stuff. He finds some prisoners. He tries to get them out.
That was incredibly dismissive. Correctly. Very weak stuff.
I'm disappointed, Gareth, that you're not a big fan of this, because I know people who love these films and swear by.
I think that when I was 12, I probably loved it, but I'm not 12 anymore, Sol.
Well, no, that's it. But I was kind of hoping you were one of these people who, would just let nostalgia blindside them, so I could be like, "No, you're wrong."
No, well, I'll tell you what.
It sounds like we're all in agreement.
But this is interesting because I've got films. I will watch Commando every time it's on the telly, and I love that film. And it's rubbish. I know it's rubbish, but I am nostalgia blind for those early Arnie films.
Yeah.
But this didn't hold up for me. I haven't watched this film for 20 years, but it was rubbish. I did not enjoy it. Can we just talk about the escape? And it's such a great action sequence. You know, there's all sorts of classic stuff going on. You know, he does the Arnie and Predator hide in the mud thing. Leaps out on someone. I enjoyed that. There's a lot of bow and arrow death, including the explosive tipped arrow shooting into the Vietnamese general. Exploding him. That's great fun.
It's basically Hawkeye before that was somehow enough of a talent to be considered a superhero.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a very, very strong argument I've heard laid out before that these 80s action movies, the Arnie and Stallone movies that were so big there were what morphed into the modern superhero movie, because it's one man against the world who's capable of taking on an army and winning, and arguably making them literal superheroes is just what, you know, making it more believable, sort of counterintuitively. But yeah, there's very, very, very clear line from this film to the likes of Hawkeye and whoever the DC equivalent is, the bow and arrow man, because Rambo is basically supernaturally good with a bow and arrow. He just points it at someone and it always hits the target, and he has little gadgets on the tips to blow stuff up when he wants to do that. And yeah, I agree. That's a really good analogy, because the film does suffer from any sort of logical scrutiny at all. You know, there's no way any of this could possibly happen. And you suspend your disbelief. That's fair enough. But yes, if you've got an invulnerability or a big iron costume that means you can't get shot, then that makes it more believable. As you say, that's counterintuitive. But yes, that's true. Very true.
Okay, so ratings?
I give it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave it a 5 as well.
Well, I've given it a 3, which is a shame. I do think that it's, as I say, it's far worse than my memory of it. And perhaps my memory of it is now, it seems a little unfair because I'm comparing it to my memory of the book as well. Nevertheless, it is objectively a rubbish film, and it's 3 out of 10.
I would give the book 6 out of 10 for comparison's sake. The book gets quite engaging and fun near the end. Once he's like running around laying all these traps and things, the book actually gets pretty good, but there's so much just like bullshit with... Oh, before we go, did you know there was a Rambo animated series?
Shut up.
Oh, I did hear this, but I don't know anything of it. Have you watched any of it?
No, I've seen clips and like the opening sequence.
From the canyons of skyscrapers to the canyons of remote mountain peaks, Liberty's champion is unstoppable. Rambo, helped by the mechanical genius known as Turbo, and the master of disguises named Cat, the honor-bound protector of the innocent. Rambo, the force of freedom.
There was a weird spate in the 80s of adapting franchises that were not remotely appropriate for children into children's cartoons, and I think everyone was kind of going, look, we know kids shouldn't be watching this, but they obviously are.
My God, I am looking at this on IMDb. And
so there was a
incredible.
RoboCop cartoon, there was an Attack of the Killer Tomatoes cartoon, there were loads of these things, and famously there was Rambo, the Force of Freedom.
The Force of Freedom. That really sums up American foreign policy very well.
Yeah. 65 episodes produced, I think basically all back to back after like a 5-episode pilot run. My understanding is they pretty much regretted the decision to produce that many episodes, couldn't sell it anywhere, but you know, they got so far into production that they just had to kind of complete it all. And yeah, it's about Rambo and his special force of freedom going up against the terrorist organization, and this is an acronym, Savage. Do you want to guess?
Not
guess
Spectre.
what that stands for?
Definitely not Spectre.
Hang on, those are the bad guys.
Savage.
Yeah, the bad guys. Savage.
Ooh.
V's got to be violence or violent.
Is American one of the words?
No.
Special.
So it's going to be it's going to be it's their name for themselves. So it's something they think
specialist.
Is good. Archery.
Artillery. No, specialist.
Specialist administrators of vengeance, anarchy, and global extortion.
Brilliant.
They really weren't shy about what they were doing.
Rambo doesn't sound anything like Stallone. Put it that way.
Next time, eat a rat. Don't work for one.
Very odd. So that's it for this week. We're gonna do the next 2 films in the Rambo series next week. So please join us again. But for now, that's it, isn't it? Rate and review us on iTunes. We haven't said that for a while.
Oh yeah, shit, do that.
If you do enjoy the show, do come back next week for the other Rambo episodes. And if you enjoy the show in general, please do rate and review us on iTunes. It just helps publicise us a little bit and helps other people find us. Of course, tell a friend, recommend us. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the podcast, isn't it? Yeah. So,
and if you really love us, we've got a Patreon.
Oh yeah.
And we'll be covering Rambo Last Blood on it.
Yes,
when we get round to seeing that. But yeah, we do all sorts of little mini episodes, diminisodes and shit. So
yeah, patreon.com/dimreturns. $1 a month, and you get quite a lot.
Diminishing Returns loves you as much as you love it.
So come back next week and find out if the body count is higher or lower in Rambo 3.